Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is Conserving Reefs in Fiji with WWF, presented by WWF's lead marine scientist, Dominic Andradi-Brown. Thank you so much for being here, Dominic. Over to you.
Thanks so much for the welcome, and it's really lovely to be here. I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you today about some of WWF's work in Fiji and also my personal experiences working with my colleagues in Fiji at the WWF team there. So I'm going to talk a lot today about ocean guardians and coral dreams and take you on a journey through Fiji's Great Sea Reef. Just to introduce myself and give you a little bit of context, as was said, my name's Dominic Andradi-Brown. I'm the lead marine scientist at WWF, and I also lead our Blue Forest program. So I lead our work focused on conserving a lot of coastal ecosystems, including mangroves and seagrass, as well as a lot of our coral reef work. I've been working at WWF for 8 years now, and I work across a range of countries, mostly supporting coastal conservation, particularly in Fiji, as I'm going to talk about today, but also with work in Indonesia, Belize, Mexico, as well as many other places around the world. My background is I'm a researcher by training. I have a PhD in coral reef management and a real passion for the ocean and diving. I've been diving for most of my life, from starting in the south coast of the UK to many tropical places that I go to now. I first started working in Fiji back in 2008, long before being at WWF. But since about 2018, I've been supporting WWF's Fiji conservation program. And today I'm really excited to talk about some of the work WWF's leading in Fiji and some of the community partners who are really driving this work forward. So let's jump straight in. So most of our work in Fiji is focused on the Great Sea Reef region. And so the Great Sea Reef is this large reef system that stretches across Fiji's two largest islands. It stretches from Viti Levu in the south, this large island you can see here, right the way up to Vanuatu in the north. It's the third largest barrier reef system in the world. It's about 280 miles long, and it's a near continuous reef. You can see if you follow my cursor on the screen, this arc of reef that goes round through the Yazawa Islands offshore here, all the way around through this offshore area, right the way around the north coast of Vanuatu to Udu Point in the north. And at parts of the reef, there's a double reef system. So across the north coast here, Vanuatu, there's actually two big barrier reefs in parallel running along this coastline, which is super exciting and means there's a lot of biodiversity there. And within this reef system, there's a lot of other life as well. There's a lot of smaller reefs, which we'll be talking about in this presentation. But this system is known as the Great Northern Wall in Fiji. And it's known as the Great Northern Wall because having this huge arc of reef along the north coast of these two islands protects a lot of these islands and the people that live there from a lot of storms and environmental damage. And we'll come to that as well later in this talk. So let's dive straight in to the Great Sea Reef. And as I said, this reef is a patchwork of islands and ecosystems. There's over 1,000 square miles of coastal ecosystems contained by this barrier reef. Everything from seagrass beds to really diverse coral reefs, which you can see fringing like this little shallow water here, this fringe you see. This is a fringing reef around one of the islands in the lagoon. So most of these islands have reefs around them. And the reefs form some really cool patterns as well and shapes. So this is in the north of the Great Sea Reef. When you look from the air, you see all these little areas of reef here where you have these little mini blue holes where the reef is fringing around the edge. And the reef has built up so much sand and sediment on top of it that it's been colonized by mangroves and now has these lush mangrove forests growing. So this is out on the reef system offshore where you have these really shallow reefs with these mangrove islands that have formed over the top. And then this is the lagoon you can see back in here. And then the main island, this is Vanuatu, that big island in the north, which you see on the horizon here. So this region is a real treasure box of nature and wildlife. And when you look at the reefs, they're really rich. They're home to over 1,000 species of reef fish, over 340 coral species, and a myriad of other marine wildlife, including some pretty rare and endangered things. So these reefs have a lot of threatened species such as sharks on them. So here you can see a grey reef shark on the left and a white-tipped reef shark on the right. This is near Mali Island in the north of the Great Sea Reef region, and we'll come back to Mali later in this presentation as I talk about some of our work on Mali. And both of these are threatened species of sharks. There's many other sharks, there's hammerhead sharks and bull sharks as well, and many of the rivers and estuaries in this region are really important shark nursery areas where these sharks come in to lay their pups. Fiji is also home to many sea turtles. 5 of the 7 species of sea turtles found globally live in this region, with green turtles and hawksbill and leatherback turtles all breeding in Fiji each year. So it's really important, this region, for both turtle populations and also turtle nesting. And we'll come back to a little bit some of that work later in this presentation. But this seascape is really highly connected to people. About 75% of people in Fiji live very close to the coastline. And the ocean is a really core part of Fijian life, supporting both food and livelihoods, but also underpinning so much of Fijian culture. And so it's critical, and healthy oceans are critical to Fijian people and their way of life. And I've been lucky, as I said, to support marine conservation in Fiji over many years, and been working pretty closely since 2018 with colleagues at WWF in Fiji to support them with their work to protect and manage this Great Sea Reef region. And through this work, I've learned a lot, and I'm constantly gaining greater understanding and respect for Fijian culture and the closeness of many Fijians to the sea. So here you can see me in Fiji, in the Ozawa Islands, sitting, chatting with Matui, who's one of the WWF Fiji community liaison officers. And as I said, this photo is in the Ozawa Islands, and we're talking about the recent impacts of a storm on the coastline, which I will come back to, and really thinking about how we can adapt and support communities to adapt to changing environmental conditions in this region. And the team at WWF, people like Matui, and many of the community partners they work with across this region are really the heroes of the story. They're the ones who are really there every day with a strong dedication and desire to improve the management of the reef and the ecosystems to deliver benefits both for themselves, for the people, but also for nature jointly in this region. So before we dive into the Great Sea Reef and some of the stories, I want to just step back and talk a little bit about what coral reefs are. Now, this is a question I often get when I talk to people. What is a coral? Because corals are a little confusing, and they're not actually what they look like. So corals are animals that live in shallow, warm, tropical waters that form hard limestone skeletons. So they lay down this calcium carbonate, this limestone, to build their skeleton, and they're a living animal. Now, what's really interesting about corals is they're actually a symbiosis with algae. And so what you can see on the left here is these tentacles that are sticking up. These little tentacles are the animal tissue, which is the main coral. But within them, you can see these little green blobs. And these are the algae. And these algal cells are known as zooxanthellae. And so the coral is a symbiosis between the animal, the animal tissue, the coral, and the algae, the zooxanthellae. And what that means is the coral provides a home for the algae to live in, but this algae absorbs sunlight and photosynthesizes to produce energy. And that energy it's capturing from the sun is then used by the algae, but it's also shared with the coral, so the coral gains from hosting these algae within their tissues. And so what are coral reefs as an ecosystem? Coral reefs really as an ecosystem are these diverse underwater habitats held together by the skeletons of corals. So when you see these beautiful reefs that are built up, like you can see in this photo here, that height and structure coming up from the seafloor really is layer upon layer of dead coral skeletons that have built up over thousands of years, corals growing on top of other corals, building this big layer of limestone, which is the actual reef system, the physical structure of the reef. So coral reefs are this mountainous habitat built by corals underwater, which hosts so much life. And so WWF targets our conservation actions to address threats around reefs and other ecosystems. And so coral reefs really are the poster child for declining ecosystems. You've probably heard this many times before, but over 50% of all tropical coral reefs have been lost over the past 100 years. And we think about 90% of coral reefs will face coral bleaching and significant impacts by about 2050. So the future, unfortunately, for coral reefs isn't that bright. But what we do know is that coral reefs in some form will survive, even though the reefs of the future probably will look quite different to the reefs of the past. And the reason for this is a range of different factors. One of those is increased temperatures. So, as many of you know, the sea temperatures are warmer, and this causes coral bleaching. And you can see here this very beautiful looking pale white coral down here. Um, this is not natural, unfortunately. This is caused by bleaching. And so bleaching is caused by high temperature and also high sunlight. Um, and so when you have this combination of high temperature and sunlight, what happens is the algae, those zooxanthellae I was talking about before, start to photosynthesize really, really fast. And they start to produce some really damaging chemicals for the corals. And so the corals deal with that by pushing those um, algae out of their tissues. So they release the algae into the water around them. And so a lot of the color you see in corals, a lot of those pretty colors you see come from the algae being there. And so without the algae being there, the corals look very white. And so that's what you're seeing here. So bleaching itself on its own doesn't kill the coral, but the problem with bleaching is that when the algae aren't there, the corals can be more vulnerable to disease, but they're also not getting as much food as they normally do. And so, really, corals can recover from bleaching if the temperature and the sunlight comes down within a few days. But if there's a long period of high temperature and high sunlight, then unfortunately those corals start to starve and start to die. And so that's when we hear a lot about news stories about coral bleaching events, that's what's happened. It's been this long period of high temperature and high sunlight that's caused that. We also have problems facing reefs around over and destructive fishing. So overfishing is when there's too much fishing happening and lots of fish are being pulled off the reef and being captured off the reef in an unsustainable way. And destructive fishing is when there's unsustainable methods being used to catch fish. So in some parts of the world, dynamite fishing is still practiced. So dynamite fishing is where blocks of dynamite are put onto the reef to explode, and that the shockwave from that stuns the fish, which float to the surface, so people can catch them. But it causes huge amounts of damage to the actual structure of the reef and makes it really hard for the corals to recover. It can take decades to recover from dynamite fishing for reefs. So that's a very bad practice. Thankfully, it's not very common in Fiji, but in some parts of the world, that's still a major threat. And then there's still a lot of pollution and runoff from agriculture, from sediment, that's also a challenge. And so a lot of our work is around sustainable land management to reduce that pollution so it doesn't impact the reefs and places we work. So why are we working in Fiji? Why have we picked Fiji as a place for WWF to really advance our coral reef work and this big focus on the Great Sea Reef region? Well, we've done a lot of global modelling, and we've also looked at other global models that scientists have published looking at the places that are the most resilient reefs. And not only the most resilient reefs, the ones that are most likely to survive into the future, but also the ones that have the best connectivity, and so the most potential to help other reefs survive. And so when we talk about connectivity, what we're talking about is the ability of larvae, so young corals and young fish, to move from one reef to another reef to help repopulate those areas. And so this is some work that's been very influential in the last few years. They looked at 30 different temperature variables, storm variables, connectivity variables, and did a lot of modelling looking at past conditions and also what future projections are to forecast what we think will happen in the future. And when you look here, this circle shows the Great Sea Reef region of Fiji, this little spot of green and yellow here. So really, this Great Sea Reef region is one of the most important sites in the South Pacific as being a reef that potentially has high resistance into the future, and also the potential to recolonize other reefs to help them recover. So that's part of the reason for us really focusing on conserving this reef system to protect it for the future, not only for itself and the people who live there, but also to help surrounding reefs elsewhere in the region. And so while we're thinking about temperature, let's dive back into the Great Sea Reef. So corals do have a lot of adaptability to temperature, and this is one of my favourite places on the reef. This is near the Ravi Ravi Passage, which is a break in that barrier reef. in the far north of the Great Sea Reef system. So off the coast of Vanuatu, that big island I showed you on the map at the start. And so I was snorkeling here in 2019, and I saw all these corals that are brightly coloured purple. And this was incredible to see. There was a whole garden of corals. And these are called acroporas. They're a relatively common coral in the shallows on the reef, but I've never seen so many that were so colourful like this in these purples. And so corals, as I said, need light to survive because they benefit from the sugar that's produced by having the algae there that are photosynthesizing inside them. But sometimes in the very shallow water, the levels of light is just too much for corals. But because these corals are really adapted to this shallow water, rather than bleaching, they can actually do something else. They can create their own sunscreen. So this purple you're looking at here is natural sunscreen that these corals are producing. So what's going on? So basically, what's happening is the coral, because of the high intensity of sunlight, is producing what's called chromoproteins. And so these chromoproteins are pigments that they produce and hold in their tissues that give them this color, but it's actually absorbing light and re-emitting the light to reduce the impact that sunlight would be having and to prevent the light having damage to the corals. So some of you may have seen in medical research the green fluorescent protein, GFPs, which are used a lot in medical research. You've probably seen some cool images of those. They're originally from a jellyfish. But these proteins that these corals are producing are very similarly related proteins to those. And so I just think this is super cool that corals are able to produce sunscreen if they're adapted to it in very shallow waters. Unfortunately, while some corals are adapted to do this, that's unfortunately not to say they can resist increasing temperatures globally. At large scale, this is not something that we see too often, but at small scales, it is really interesting to see some of these adaptations that we can see. So I want to jump to some of the stories and some of the lessons I've learned working in the Great Sea Reef with some of the community partners we have there. So this is a map of the Great Sea Reef region. The dashed red line is the Great Sea Reef region that I showed you earlier. And what you see here marked out are what are called the Ngoli-Goli. Now that's a strange word, Ngoli-Goli. It's a Fijian word. And what they are these customary fishing areas. So in Fiji for centuries, the indigenous Fijian people, the Ataki people, have had traditional fishing areas that they have managed and that they've controlled. And so different communities have very clearly defined rights and management and ownership of marine resources in their traditional fishing areas. And so that's what this map shows. So there's about 20 of these traditional fishing areas across the Great Sea Reef, each of which is controlled and managed by a different community. And this control, a lot of it is enshrined in traditional customary law, but it's also recognised in national law in Fiji as well. So Fiji's got a very strong recognition of indigenous rights, and so a lot of these traditional customary laws are recognised at the national level. So for anyone to do work in these areas, and as WWF, if we want to work on coral reefs in one of these areas, we can't just go there. We have to talk to the community leaders from that community who manage their Ngoli-Goli and ask for permission to go there. And the same even with the government. If the government wants to do something in these marine areas, they also have to talk to the communities and let the communities know and consult with the communities before they do things in these Ngoli-Goli areas. And so WWF's Fiji Country Programme, our work in Fiji, is really focused on working with communities in these Ngoli-Goli to improve the management and the conservation of resources in them. So whenever we go to a community and we start a project, or we're just visiting to check up on a project or any work there, the first thing we have to do is talk to the village chief or some of the village leaders to request access to the Ngoli-Goli and to talk about what we want to do. And WWF's been working here for many decades now, and so we have a strong relationship with many of these community leaders, which is how the team in Fiji has forged such a strong partnership here around sustainable fisheries management and around wildlife conservation in these areas. And we've also taken many of these community leaders to international events as well to share their perspective on the global stage. So what's going on here? So when we arrive in a community, we always start with a kava ceremony. So kava is a dried root, and so it's a dried root of the kava plant that's grown commonly across Fiji, and it's used to make a drink. And so here you can see my colleague Matui presenting dried kava wrapped up in that newspaper bundle to the village elders. So this is Semi Chunas Obu, who's on the left there, who's receiving this this kava offering to him and to the village. And so they take it, and what they do is grind it up. So you can see here on the right, this is a piece of coconut trunk, a tree trunk that has this groove in, and they pound the kava in there to turn it into a fine powder. And then it's poured through, it's placed in a cloth, a fine cloth, and water's poured through it. And it's kind of moved to really absorb the water, and water's poured through several times, and then it's wrapped up in this cloth, and it's kind of wringed out into the water to really make sure the kava is absorbed into the water. And then what happens is we all sit round in either the village hall or in one of the chief's houses, and these small coconuts you can see here, these coconut shells, are filled with kava from the bowl, and as a communal group, we sit there and the bowls are passed around, and we drink the kava, and it tastes kind of a bit bitter and a bit earthy. I kind of like it, and it's a very nice way to start meetings with communities. It's a very traditional ceremony, but it's really our way of being welcome to the village, to have a chance to talk to them about what we want to do, catch up about partnerships we have, some of the ongoing work, and hear their perspectives and what they're up to as well, so that we can jointly work together to advance work in that community, in that Ngoli Goli. And so following one of these ceremonies in 2019, when I was actually on Mali Island in the north of Malay. So Mali is a small island just off the big island in the north that I showed you on the map earlier. And so you can see on the left here, this is one of the villages on Mali Island. And so I was there chatting in this kava ceremony with some of the community members, and I met there Henry Kolinawi, who you can see on the right here. So Henry is a turtle monitor, so he works on sea turtle monitoring for the Mali Island community. And so Henry has a really interesting story. It was really fascinating to chat to him about what he was doing in Mali and on the Great Sea Reef. So Henry used to be a turtle hunter. So as I said at the start, Fiji is home to 5 of the 7 sea turtle species, and turtle meat is a really traditional staple that's eaten in Fiji. It's been eaten for many, many centuries. It's a really important part of traditional culture, but it used to only be consumed at very special events, so at a wedding or a funeral. And it was something that would only be eaten very rarely to mark very, very special occasions. But then over recent decades, it became a more common food item, and its consumption increased to be a much more regular meat that was eaten. And that really started to have a big impact on turtle populations in Fiji. And turtle populations really severely declined in Fiji, actually, because of how much harvesting there was going on of turtles. And so turtles in Fiji are now endangered or vulnerable, depending on which species we're talking about. And so WWF has spent a lot of time working with communities and also talking to communities to hear their perspectives on this issue, to try and conserve turtles and sustainably manage turtle populations for the future. And so this all started in the 90s. So in 1995, the Fijian government imposed a temporary ban on turtle harvesting. And then in 2008, WWF pushed for a 10-year moratorium to basically ban almost all harvesting of turtles, except for very special occasions that required a permit. And so we never fully stopped all turtle harvesting because it is a very important cultural practice in Fiji, but it was really about trying to reduce it so there was only very, very rare occasions turtle meat was still eaten. Um, and as part of this broader work, here you can see Henry on the north coast of Marley Island. And so what you see here on the top of this hill is the watchtower that was built on Marley. And so this tower was built for the people in the community in Mali to help manage their waters and manage their Ngoli Goli area. So this is that customary fishing area they have control of. And so you can see on this map here that Henry's talking to me and talking me through. The watchtower is on the actual island just in the south here. And you can see these marked zones here. These are what are called tambao areas. These are areas that are close to fishing. And you can also see on this map, you can't see very well in this photo, but when I was looking at it there, you can see some areas which are the turtle nesting beaches. And so regularly from this tower on the top of the hill, the Marley Island community have people looking out. And they're basically looking out to see if anyone's illegally coming in and trying to fish in their tambao areas, these areas that they've closed fishing to, and also if anyone's coming to any of the turtle nesting beaches and trying to catch turtles when they shouldn't be, because obviously they're protected now. And so this house was built in 2016 really for the community to take leadership and be able to, as part of their efforts, to try and control and manage what was going on in their waters that they had customary management rights over. And so Henry told me he really does this work so that his children and grandchildren can have turtles around them. And he's really happy to see the impact it's having. So he said when he used to go fishing with his father, he saw very few turtles in the water, and he himself used to fish for those turtles and try and catch them. And now since they've stopped harvesting turtles, they do start to see a population recovery. Numbers are still low, but they are starting to see some recovery of the turtle population, which is really fantastic news. And so communities really are leading the way with protecting the ocean and their resources and sea turtle populations. And it's not just watching from shore that they're involved in. Communities are also very actively involved in patrolling out in these tambao areas, these areas that I mentioned before, which are close to fishing within their Ngoli Goli, within their customary fishing areas. And so that's really helping wildlife to recover. And it's not just this patrolling, it's also a lot of the monitoring that they're involved in as well. So every year, as I said, sea turtles are coming ashore in the Great Sea Reef to nest. And we have a strong community volunteer program led by a lot of the community members, which WWF provides some support to. We provide some training and technical support to go out and monitor these nests. And really what we're trying to understand is how many turtles are being born each year from these beaches in the Great Sea Reef, and how many eggs are being laid. And so what this involves is the community members patrolling beaches and looking at where turtles are coming ashore and building their nests and laying eggs, and then tracking that nest. And then once the young turtles hatch in that nest, going and actually very carefully digging up the nest to look at how many eggs were in the nest and how many of those eggs actually successfully hatched from the nest, and how many young turtles came out of the nest. And of course, as they dig up these nests, they often find some stragglers that haven't quite managed to get out, which is always exciting. And so these, of course, are helped very gently to the ocean to get back out into the wild and really help boost that turtle population. And it's not just Babel turtles and the turtle nests that we're monitoring and the WWF team is working on. So this is also in the Great Sea Reef. We also support work looking at understanding the health of the adult sea turtle population as well. And so this is a little more strongly led by WWF and some of our WWF team who are out there, and is very closely in partnership with several scientists and requires a lot of training and research permits to do. But our team actually goes out and looks and conducts surveys looking for adult sea turtles, and one of the team duck dives down, snorkeling underwater to find these turtles as they do the surveys, and then they very carefully hold them and bring them slowly up to the surface. And then on the surface, once they have the turtle, they bring it alongside to the boat, and they pass it up to the science team on the boat. And the science team pulls it on board, and they collect data to monitor the health of the sea turtles. So we're interested in things like the size of the turtle, the sex of the turtle, as well as taking some DNA samples from it. And we're really trying to monitor what's happening to the age of the turtle population. How many old turtles do we have on the reef? How healthy are they? And learning a lot of insights about the sea turtle population there. We're particularly interested in some of the DNA samples from these turtles because they feed into a broader global WWF project we have called Shellbank. And so that's building a global DNA database of sea turtles from the world. And this is really useful because turtles are still illegally sold in the wildlife trade across a lot of markets. And so that DNA database helps us understand when turtles are confiscated at international borders, when people are illegally smuggling them. We can use that DNA data to match from those illegally captured turtles at borders. We can trace them back to wild turtle populations by having this data set of DNA from wild turtle populations to understand where some of these turtles that are illegally being traded are coming from in the global trade. And so once the measurements have been taken from the sea turtles, they're very carefully placed back into the water and let go. So this whole process only takes a few minutes, but it's very exciting to see and generate some really, really important scientific data to inform what's going on with the turtle population in the region. So I want to share one more story about Fiji and about the Great Sea Reef. And this is really a story about some of the storms and coastal damage that storms are causing. And so this is Nakua Island in the Uzawa Islands. So those were that cluster of islands off to the west on the map of Fiji I showed you at the start. And this is Navatua village. So this is in one of the villages in the Uzawa Islands that WWF has been working for a long time. And it's a very pretty, idyllic looking village. When you visit this village, the waters are really crystal clear blue, and there's a beautiful sandy beach along the front. It's very, very picturesque. And part of this beauty has led to a lot of tourism in this area. So the Uzawa Islands are really important for tourism in Fiji. And so a lot of the communities in the Uzawas are engaged in livelihoods that connect to tourism, whether it's making things that are sold to tourists. And I'll come back to that tourism story in a little bit for this village, because this village has really tried to capitalize on international tourism to bring income and livelihoods into the village for the community. But when I first visited these islands, one thing that really struck me was looking at this huge erosion they're seeing on the coastline, and talking to villagers. They were telling me that they were losing many feet of coastline every year from storms. And so whenever a storm comes through, the waves, particularly and the wind driving those waves from rising sea levels, is leading to a lot of coastal erosion here. So it's a real challenge for this community. And as I showed you on the previous photo, the village is right on the waterfront. So there isn't actually that much space between the village and the ocean here. And so trees are falling into the ocean, and this whole area used to be land. And you can see how much material and sand and soil has been lost by looking at that height difference. So this land used to extend all the way out beyond where the water is now, and it's very rapidly being eroded away. And so the community was really struggling with how to deal with this, what to do. And this is Suluasi, who is a fish warden in the village, and he was chatting to me, and he works very closely with the WWF team here about the erosion problem, what's happening, and he was telling me a little bit about some of the tourism the village was engaged in, and particularly what I found really exciting and cool was this building you can see, this beach hut you can see here in the photo, are community-owned beach huts that the community had built. and they're actually advertising them on Airbnb. And their idea is they want to offer international visitors to Fiji the opportunity to experience what life in a Fijian village is like. So they've built these huts, um, and they have a lot of tourists, mostly from Europe, actually, who book these huts on Airbnb and come and stay for 2 or 3 days in the village, in these huts. They're actually pretty nice inside. They have comfortable beds. They don't have AC, unfortunately, but they have fans, and they have electricity. But people who want to come for kind of a bit more of an off-grid experience and have a few days in a village, experiencing what traditional village life is like. There's opportunities for people to go out fishing with some of the villagers, or just enjoying the beach and enjoying connecting with nature. And so these huts have been generating a lot of income for the community, which has been channeled into community projects. But they're really worried that they're going to lose this as these huts fall into the sea because of how much coastal erosion is happening there. And so this brings me back to this conversation, and this is a photo I started this presentation with, where I was sitting chatting to Matui, who's our community liaison officer for WWF Fiji. I was sitting on this beach here on the island in the Azores, looking at the coastal erosion, and it was kind of hard at times not to despair when you see how much damage is being caused by storms here. And really, I know many people around the world are experiencing this, but it really hits home spending time actually face to face talking to people about it and learning from them what they're trying to do about it. And Matui cautioned me that while it is a challenge and it's hard to address, there are some solutions that the community is adopting and that WWF is supporting the community with to address this. And the main one that they're doing here is really thinking about restoring mangroves. So this is Tulia Makisowo Alu, and so she's one of the villagers here, and she is restoring mangroves. So this is some mangroves that they planted a couple of years ago. And mangroves are really good at coastal protection. So having these mangroves along the shoreline protect the coastline from waves, from those storms, which helps reduce the erosion. So they're now very proactively starting to restore mangroves and plant mangroves, and actually help maintain those mangroves. So here they're actually removing some trash that's been washed up into these mangroves by the waves in front of Nakula village in the Azores. And they're also preparing other areas for restoration to plant to try and protect the coastline. And part of this is really trying to accelerate how many mangroves they have, and so they're building nurseries. And so here you can see these are called Rhizophora mangroves. These are quite a common mangrove species in Fiji. And so what they're doing is they're harvesting the Rhizophora pods, so these pods that the trees produce to reproduce, and they're planting them up in nurseries and growing them on to form small seedlings, which they then can go out and plant in the wild along their coastline to both protect their coastline, but also this has a lot of benefits for wildlife in general. Mangroves are a really important wildlife habitat, really important for a lot of fish species as well. So there's a lot of different benefits that come from this. And so from some of these conversations, as part of our science work, we've also really started to think more tangibly about how do we change the conservation work we're doing to better adapt to future environmental risks and to help communities also think about these environmental risks alongside what we more traditionally do, which is kind of the wildlife conservation and the biodiversity conservation, because people are really key to the success of this work, and they need to be a really integral part and leaders of this work. And so we started doing a lot of science as well in this space, and I'm just going to give you one highlight here. This is some work we did in partnership with Griffith University in Australia, where we looked, and this is the Great Sea Reef region, so you can see Viti Levu, the big island in the south, Bama Levu, the big island in the north, and this arc of colour here you can see is the Great Sea Reef region. So we've been doing a lot of mapping work and prioritisation work, running computer models to look at where should we prioritise our efforts for protection. If we were thinking about a more typical wildlife-focused, biodiversity-focused, nature-focused approach, and then if we want to really think about cyclones and the risk of storms, and how we can best protect communities from storms alongside the wildlife and biodiversity approach. Where would we select for protection? So here you see the more traditional approach selects these areas for protection, but as soon as we start thinking about how can we best protect communities from storms, as well as having the benefits for biodiversity, you see that we end up selecting different places. These are these red areas that you can see here. And this big band here is the Yazawa Islands. So these Yazawa Islands, where I was just talking about, are very vulnerable to storms, and we can have a really big benefit for communities by protecting and planting mangroves and restoring mangroves alongside the benefits for wildlife. So, as I've said, I think for me, it's really been an incredible experience to work for the last 6 or 7 years with the team in Fiji and really support them with their work in the Great Sea Reef. And I really want to leave you with a few key messages here. And so the first is that the Fiji's Great Sea Reef really is a global treasure. As I said at the start, it's the third largest reef system in the world. It's really home to vibrant coral ecosystems, sea turtles, sharks, countless marine species. If you have the opportunity to visit it, I encourage you to do so. It's a really incredible natural wonder to see. And especially in the Great Sea Reef, but also more generally in places WWF works, local communities really are central to conservation. Particularly in Fiji, they're the traditional custodians of these marine areas. They've been managing these marine areas and these ngoli for centuries. And so they play a vital role in protecting the reef and the coastal ecosystems. And so anything we do to promote marine conservation in Fiji really has to be led by them and us supporting them with that. Given that role they have and that strong leadership role they play in protecting and managing their resources. The other thing I wanted to say is that we're already seeing big impacts from environmental changes and climate on coastal communities here. Communities are facing these rising seas and stronger storms, and so we are seeing some of the beaches disappearing. And so we're really focused on actions that can help those communities adapt and be resilient. So whether it's planting mangroves, whether it's livelihood interventions really around helping communities adapt to these environmental risks and protect their coastlines. And so, as I said, WWF is taking action, working here, and I really encourage you also to take action. Everyone has a role to play in ocean conservation, no matter where they live. And so I want to leave you with just a few thoughts of what you can do yourselves. So if you're traveling, do your research about the places you're visiting. Think about tracking your footprint. And if you're visiting a coral reef area or a coastal area, understand and follow best practices and responsible travel practices for the places you visit. It's really important that you do that to minimize your impact in the places that you visit. So thank you so much for listening. It's really been fantastic to talk to you, and I'm very happy to take any questions you have and answer any questions you have. Thanks so much.
Wow, Dominic, thank you so much for that very interesting webinar and presentation. I learned so much about an area I have not personally had the opportunity to travel to, but now you just put it up near the top of the list. I have to see this reef. It's beautiful. Awesome, everybody. So now we have the opportunity to talk to Dominic. If you have a question, go ahead and submit that in the questions box there in your control panel. For about the next 12-ish minutes, we'll see how many we can get through. Awesome. We have a lot coming in here. Let's start. This is an interesting question. So would there be a trade-off by letting the baby turtles grow larger before release them? I guess the big question here is, why are they released right at hatching instead of letting to get a little bigger?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that a lot of not a lot, some conservation projects do actually do. So in this part of the Great Sea Reef, because we have limited facilities, the turtles normally we let them naturally hatch. We want them to naturally hatch, and they crawl down the beach. You've probably seen many exciting videos of turtles crawling down beaches. So we let them naturally hatch and go straight into the wild. We don't want to take them into captivity or anything to do that. Partly because we don't really have the resources and facilities there to to do anything more than that in these remote areas. But there is a lot of work in some other parts of the world where they do what's called head starting programs, where baby turtles are kept in for a few days, a few weeks, sometimes even longer than that, months, and they're fed and they're given a chance to grow a little larger before they're released, and that does can lead to some greater survival rates of those turtles as well. So that is a very recognised conservation approach. So it's a little different depending on where you are, how much facilities you have, and what approach is taken.
Great, thank you. Next, this is a good one. Do you see a lot of issues with like big trawling boats or just big fishing boats that are coming into the reefs?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So big trawling boats and big industrial fishing boats um, can be challenging. It is a big threat to a lot of marine environments. Luckily, within the Great Sea Reef region itself, so within that barrier reef, we don't see too many big boats. And the reason for that is within the reef and in that big lagoon area, all of those areas are defined in these ngoli, these customary fishing areas. So those communities tend to be fishing in much smaller boats, and they control a lot of the management and access to fishing in those areas. So in some of the further offshore areas, for some of the larger fishery species, not around the reefs, some of the things like tuna that are caught, we do see more industrial fleets. And so we do also work to support sustainability of those. Um, and in Fiji itself, trawling hasn't been such a big issue that I've seen, but certainly in other parts of the world, trawling is a big issue in some of those big industrial fleets, and it's an area that WWF is actively working on to try and address.
Great, thank you. That's good to know. At least those big boats aren't going through and, breaking up all the bottom of the reefs with their big trawlers. Okay, great. We have lots of really good ones coming in. Could you explain a little bit further what's causing the erosion? Were the mangroves originally cut down and that's why these storms are removing the land? Or was it just the storms have gotten stronger or land degradation? Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so it's a real mix of all of the above. It depends kind of where in the Great Sea Reef region we're talking about. So where I was talking about in the presentation, there are a lot of mangroves in that area, but that beachfront didn't historically have mangroves on it. So that is just more intense and more frequent storms that are causing that damage connected to sea level rise is causing it there. But there are some other places in the Great Sea Reef where the story is a little different. So on Marley Island, which I talked about, I was talking about some of the sea turtle work, there's a community there that did have mangroves in front of their village. And about 50 years ago, they cleared quite a large area of those to increase the ease of access for boats to get in and out of their village. And then in the last 10 years or so, they've realised that they're seeing erosion of their shoreline. They're seeing a lot of strong wind blowing through their village they didn't used to see. And so they've actually gone and restored mangroves in a lot of that area and just left a more narrow boat channel to access the village from. So they kind of went full circle. They cleared some of their mangroves because they wanted the ease of access to the ocean, and then they started to realise that had a detrimental impact on the village. So they went back and restored them and have established forests back there now to protect themselves from these storms. Because it's not just, as I said, it's not just the waves; it's also the wind that the mangroves provide all the protection from.
Great. And on that same note, how long does it take for the mangroves that have been replanted to make a noticeable difference?
That's a good question. It, the honest answer is it depends a little bit on a few things: what species of mangrove, how quickly it grows. Normally, we say kind of 5 to 10 years. You'll start to see an impact. So it is a little bit of a long-term investment. When you do restoration and they're the very young plants, um, they're not going to have too much of an impact. So you need to let them mature into a bit more of a forest before they start providing that protection.
great. And then switching to the turtles here, are the teams that are like studying these turtles, do they tag them and track them?
Yeah, so they do indeed. Yeah, so the idea is to tag these turtles, to be able to track them through time, so that we can understand what's happening with the population, especially if we recatch a turtle that we tagged several years in the past, so we can understand how that turtle has grown and any health changes that it's had. So yeah, tagging is a big part of this. We're also doing some really cool work with some new digital sensors and tracking as well. um, so we some of these turtles we've put, particularly actually in Indonesia more than Fiji, we've put some GPS trackers on, and we're starting to track their movements across the Pacific to understand how the different islands in the Pacific are all connected in their turtle populations as well. So it's not just the catching and monitoring the turtle when you catch them, but we're increasingly putting trackers on that connect to satellites that allow us to remotely get that data. So once we tag the turtle for many months after we release it, and in some cases years, we can still get more data from them as those loggers track what the turtle's doing, what depth it's going to, where in the Pacific it's going to. So that's actually a big area of new innovation and exciting research. Because as technology becomes smaller and cheaper and easier to use, we can start to really get a lot of really good data from putting those more advanced tags on the turtles.
Oh, yeah, that is very exciting. Are you starting to notice any migration patterns in this part of the world or anything like that?
So for Fiji itself, we haven't seen. We've mostly been looking at the hawksbill turtle population and the green turtle population, which is much more resident in Fiji. We've done a lot of work actually in leatherback turtles across the Pacific region, and so we are seeing some really strong connections in the leatherback turtle population and migrations there. So some of the leatherbacks we work on actually they nest in the Western Pacific around Papua New Guinea, potentially the Solomon Islands. Some of the leatherbacks do nest in Fiji as well, and then they travel all the way across the Pacific to feed. So they go from that Western Pacific island region, they go through Hawaii, right way across to the coast of California to feed, and then they come back to nest again. So there's this huge migration of these leatherbacks going on across the Pacific, which is super exciting to see and really understand. And that's one way, particularly sitting in the US where I sit and work in the US WWF office. That's one of the strong connections we see with our colleagues in the Pacific. That turtle population that people see off California is the same turtle population colleagues in the Western Pacific are seeing as well.
Wow. That's absolutely incredible to think about and just how far they're going from one place to another. And then when we're continuing to talk about how these sea turtles are being researched, could you discuss a little bit more when the scientists are like taking them on board? So, like, how does that process work, and how do they make sure the turtle is calm? What kind of data are they collecting? Is this when they put the tags on? All those kinds of things. That would be great.
Yeah, so when they bring turtles onto the boat, it's done in a very calm way. It's a very short. They try and minimise how long it takes. So the turtles are just very carefully lifted onto the boat and placed into the boat, um, and they're measured with a tape measure to look at their size. We want to look at the size of their shell. We also want to take a DNA sample from them, um, and then depending on what type of tags used, it depends exactly how it's attached. The GPS tags are glued onto the shell of the turtle, and then they're very carefully lowered back into the water. So they try and minimise how long the turtles are actually out of the water for, um, to try and keep it to no more than a few minutes if they can. Um, and it's a very specialised team that does this, and there's a lot of training and research permits that goes into actually being able to do this. So I myself personally am not don't do this, but we have a really fantastic team that does that work in Fiji.
Wow, great. Yeah, and I think this is a great question too. What is next? Like, what are you most excited about, or anything you can talk about? What's like your next big project, or those next things that keep you going that you're working on?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really exciting question. So there's a few different things I'd love to talk about here. So in Fiji, we're really trying to advance our mangrove work and really thinking about how we can better support communities with protection from storms and coastal damage through mangroves. So we have a few different projects that we're launching in the next few months that will do that. We have a couple of smaller projects in the Azawa Islands and on the north coast of Viti Levu, focused on that, where we're working with 2 or 3 new communities to support them with some training around how to do mangrove restoration, help them think about where they and support them with where they want to do that restoration and support them with actually doing it. We're also looking for some larger funding to try and actually do this on a larger scale in Fiji. So we're in some conversations with the Fijian government and other potential funding partners to think about how can we really upscale and do large-scale mangrove restoration across the Great Sea Reef region. So that's one big area of work. And the other area of work that I want to talk a little bit about is we're trying to think about livelihoods as well. And so I have some colleagues who work on our ocean finance team, which thinks about sustainable finance and how to better support sustainable finance for conservation and livelihoods. And so they're also working with some of these small community enterprises to think about opportunities to get better finance to sustainable enterprise in these communities to help them have generate income and grow their businesses in a sustainable way across the region as well, to try and promote this more sustainable approach to management in the Great Sea Reef region.
Wow, how exciting. Yes, those are all amazing. I'm so glad that we got to hear what's next on the horizon. Those are all really exciting things. All right, so that is the last question we will take for today. So, Dominic, I'd love to turn it to you for any last closing comments.
So thank you so much for listening. It's been really wonderful to talk to you. I hope you all get a chance to visit Fiji or the ocean anywhere near you. And yesterday was World Oceans Day, and so I just want to wish you all a very happy World Oceans Day. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, absolutely. That is why this webinar came to be. It's like in celebration of World Oceans Day, who would be better than our WWF partners than to celebrate this incredible day? So thanks again, Dominic. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.